Thank you all for joining us once again for another episode of 123 Chess. And we have Chris, a guest with us, who was on our channel before, and we're super stoked to go over a couple games that he played with each of us. So we'll start by tackling the game with Chris versus Tom. So you guys want to kick it off?
Sounds good.
Yeah, Chris, go ahead. Take the floor.
Alrighty, so in this game, I played the white pieces, and I started off with my very typical opening e4, which is no surprise. So there we go. There's my e4 opening. I know some may consider it boring, but it's really just what I use. I'm still at what I would consider a beginner stage, so I haven't branched out and played with much else. So then the game continues. Tom gave me what I consider to be the middle of the board. I know he's cooking something up there in his chess oven, but I said, hey, if I've got a chance, I'm going to take both my pawns out to the fourth rank there, which I did. And then, yep, sure enough, he's still competing for the center there. I go ahead and move my pawn forward one more square, which is what I always do if given the chance. And then he brings out his bishop. And this is where things got a little bit interesting, is I decided to get aggressive and I moved my knight over to the side to attack his bishop. And that's why I moved that pawn on the G, on row G there forward, so that I could do that without his queen being able to take it. And then he retreats. I figured that would make sense. He would attack the rook, which he did. And so then I was obliged to block that, which forced him to move back, which gave me the opportunity to go ahead and take the bishop with the knight, which I was happy to do because I typically like bishops better for the long run. And, you know, if he wants to take back, he's going to have to do so and kind of mess up his pawn structure a little bit. So that was kind of the first major action I felt that happened in the game. Tom, what's your viewpoint of that?
So I guess getting here, you can kind of see my notes here, but this up here is, so this is the Caro-Kann, which is the line I played. When you advance that that e-pawn, that's the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann, which then the main line is bringing your bishop out here. Seeing the knight come out is still pretty mainline, and so the response is going to be bringing the e-pawn up to solidify that kind of V-shaped pawn structure there on the black side. When I saw this, the pawn come out here, this is a little bit of an atypical response. I've seen it in a few games now, but it's a little bit more rare. So my response here of advancing this C pawn, I haven't really done a thorough engine analysis of this yet. I did look at the eval bar. It's interesting because I've seen this in a few games now. I've been playing a fair amount of bullet games online, and so that's where I've seen most of this. And my typical response, and mind you, it is in bullet games that I've seen this mostly, has been actually more recently bringing my bishop to e4. I have been playing that. I've been liking that. The engine didn't quite like that as much. I couldn't tell you exactly why. I guess from my perspective, the thing that I like about this is I like if the bishop comes out here, which seems to me like the most logical response. You know, if I do take and the capture is back, I still have this very strong pawn structure here, and that bishop really doing a heck of a lot as the fianchettoed bishop. And oftentimes I want to take out this pawn with the intention of advancing this pawn and taking there, and I've removed one of the defenders on that d4 pawn. This bishop often gets lost. The white squared bishop often gets sacrificed off in the Caro-Kann defense, and very frequently for that knight. And so that was kind of my logic there. for why I've been playing that now. But the engine did actually like the move I did better, which was this, which is really preparing to capture that pawn, much like I said I plan on doing. So that's also pretty typical. When I see this knight bounce out here, this is novel territory for me, for sure. And I did want to take this opportunity to then, advance that pawn. I figured at this point in time, the typical response would be to advance to your F pawn, but from my perspective, I'm weakening the pawn structure around your king, and basically all but making it impossible for you to now castle on your king side. So that happens. With that happening, then comes my retreat. The capture can happen here and does. However, the thing that I like about the capture here is that when I get to retake, I take with the H pawn, and suddenly I have an open file for my rook here. And so, yeah, I mean, Chris, I would agree with you to some extent in terms of that pawn structure around my on my king side getting a little messed up. And obviously, and this is kind of nature of Caro-Kann in general, the queen side pawn structure, because of the advance of that C pawn, typically makes castling a little slower, at least on the queen side. So at this point in time, I'm thinking like maybe the possibility exists of being able to castle queen side. Also, just because of how strong the pawn structure is around my king, I would say I also have some potential of maybe not castling this game, and having that open file on the rook. I was feeling very good at this point in time in the opening, trying to accomplish what I was trying to accomplish.
Good deal. And maybe it wasn't the most efficient or best approach, but I was feeling good at the same time, simply because when I play black, I always do the Caro-Kann as well. And I know one of the frustrations with that for me is when you bring out that bishop, you're looking for a good trade-off that doesn't hurt you very much. So I typically try not to lose my bishop, even to a knight. And so I guess I was trying to punish my own, I was punishing myself, so to speak, because I saw that you were doing Caro-Kann as well.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Your logic makes sense, because obviously, generally speaking, bishops are stronger than knights in the long term. And then as well, the whole simplification thing. So you're like, sure, it opened up his file, but at the same time, I initiated the trade. I got it out of the way. We can move forward and I'll just deal with the repercussions of that file open. So I get it.
Yeah. And one of the repercussions of the way the board ended up right here is the fact that now my knight is gone and it's not protecting those two pawns in the middle, which then makes it super easy for you to end up, Tom, taking that D4 pawn, which then just helps you start to really, really control the center of the board. I end up only with one pawn out there kind of isolated. The computer did not like me bringing my bishop out here, I think because it could see that you were about ready to take over the center of the board. And so it wanted me to bring forward my C2 pawn to protect that D4 pawn. So that way, if you take it, I could take back and still have some semblance of some center power. But I didn't. I brought my bishop out because I wanted to start developing some of the more major pieces than the pawns. But that was a mistake according to the computer because, yep, there you go. So then I keep developing in a method, that I think is good. Bring out the queen, forces me to respond with advancing my pawn there so you don't come down. And we just keep developing. And I'm looking for a chance to castle pretty soon because I realize, so I'm pretty stuck because of that doggone D4 pawn. That really did hurt me. So I'm kind of tight. So I had to move my bishop just to free up space so I could get my knight out. So then I could go ahead and castle down the road is what I was hoping. Now that surprised me. I didn't expect me to sacrifice the knight just for a pawn in that spot. Now I'm trying to figure out why did I not just take back right there? Because you've got that file, the H file, you've got the rook on, which is what you wanted, right? Yeah.
So here, yeah. So I mean, kind of getting here. If I can back it up a little bit. So now we've got the fianchettoed structure on at least the pawn, right? That B pawn push on the queen side as well. So from my perspective, the pawn structure is becoming weaker. The knight comes out, putting pressure or defending my pawn that I captured in the middle, while at the same time also putting pressure on this E pawn, threatening to recapture that. And so this is all pretty consistent. One of the things I like about the Caro-Kann in general is it's a pretty, it tends to be a pretty classical sort of a structure of a game where you're really focusing on attacking those center squares of the board. I already got one of them, and so now I'm trying to pick away at that advanced E pawn. The defense comes there of that one. And now just wanting to get, the rest of my pieces developed. Knight coming here with the anticipation of jumping out there to free up this line for my bishop. So yeah, that was a very in-between move because I needed to get that knight out of the way. That's the square that I wanted to go. And I'm feeling, very comfortable here again. And yeah, this is just that little tactic, being able to attack the pawn, which is now hanging, because if the recapture happens here, then I'm able to take the rook on the H file, which you obviously see, and I just bounce back, having now taken the free pawn. At this
so
point,
that was Tom, that was a pretty devastating move. You taking my pawn with your knight, because I was so proud of that nice pawn wall that I had built.
Yeah.
But it was such a strong move because I couldn't take back.
And I mean, I think that's one of the powers that you get with an open file with those rooks early game. I mean, I get the perspective where you're coming from of like, I'm wrecking the pawn structure. It is wrecking the pawn structure. But something to bear in mind is when you're capturing toward the center, just in general, if a pawn is capturing towards the center, it tends to usually be a decent pawn structure that ends up developing. And likewise, another one that I see sometimes as well is actually capturing toward the side that you're castling. So if you do end up capturing out, like away from the middle, if you're capturing toward the side that your king is on, it tends to sometimes give your king a little bit of added protection.
I think I would just underscore what both of you guys are saying. I would say probably, when the pawn took here, I would say that was probably your first critical moment, and then the second was when Tom took there with the tactic.
So at this point, I'm just trying to stay alive. I am able to get my bishop over there, which is where I wanted to get it. But I should have had it on the other side to protect me from getting checked right here. But I was able to take to handle that check. You use your powerful H file that's open with the rook there to take back. I'm just at this point really trying to get castled. That's all I can focus on. And you slowed me down from doing that a great deal. But I get castled. Help me with that word. I think it's a French word with the way I've got my bishop set up there. Is that fianchetto or something similar?
Fianchetto, yeah.
So typically I would do that on the king side. And so the king is right underneath the bishop and the rook's over one space and it feels a little more solid. But at least I got castled. And I've got my bishop on a good line, although doesn't have very many active squares yet. So you come down and attack my rook. I move it out of the way. At this point, I'm being pretty responsive, just trying to stay alive and get castled. And so I don't really have a lot of momentum, that's for sure. So then I'm like, okay, doggone that pawn. That kind of was the first wave of losing, power in the center. So I'm trying to attack that d4 pawn.
Oh, that was such a risky move when you when you took that, or when you threatened to exchange pawns there, like this move, I don't think I would have done that, but I think that was actually a really good idea because regardless if it was objectively good, you recognize that if you're going to have any opportunity to attack, you'd do it now while his king is on that same file.
Right. And if he had taken my pawn out, you know, I had my bishop there to take back. I get my king out of the way because I don't want to be on the same line as the queen. And so I just saw the eval bar grow quite a bit. I don't understand why. I don't understand why that was a bad move.
So I can go over that.
So I see your note, Tom. I think, is that your note? You think that was your first mistake?
Yeah, I think this was my first mistake of the game. I really got greedy here, is what it was. In the game, you know, I had been clamping down on your position. I had gotten some tactics in there, and I have a very clear material advantage. I'm 3 points up at this point in time, and I really, I think my much better plan of attack would be to say, you know, I'm pretty secure here in the middle. I probably could have gotten away with this, but I don't even think that I needed to really do that because, you know, after you capture, I've got the recapture and defense after that. So I had that, I think, a much stronger move, and I didn't run this through an engine or anything, but I think just bringing my rook over to this open H file probably would have been a much better way to go. Or, you know, maybe even just bringing my king into safety a little bit over here to just get him out of the way of the potential for bringing a rook down here and pinning my queen to my king ultimately. But I saw a free pawn and I really stopped. I turned my brain off and I was like, oh, I'm going to gobble up the free pawn. Well, we see some real problems that start to develop after I take this pawn, some of which is really related to, you know, this bishop. All I did is I just stuck my queen on this diagonal where the bishop is.
Yep.
And we've been looking at this move, right, of the pawn capture. Well, now that pawn capture is threatening my queen if you take that pawn. So, you know, that puts me in a bit of a precarious position. And one of the other things that I didn't really evaluate very well is once I move here and I take that pawn, well, where do I go now?
Right.
So when you capture, I can't move here, I can't move here, I can't move here, I can't move here. So, you know, the one potential for place that I can move and still stay in that middle is over here, or I'm talking about retreating. But even if I move here, like I'm still in line of that bishop. It just was not a good place. And that pawn wasn't doing anything. I mean, all that pawn was really doing was blocking in that really strong diagonal for your bishop. So that pawn was preventing this bishop from really having any power. It was really working to my advantage. If I had done this, that would have gotten one more piece into play. That would have gotten my rook into play. I'm threatening to take this pawn down here. I mean, it's obviously defended by your queen, but the idea is I
think we lost you, Tom. I can't hear you. Awesome.
Okay, great.
Here we are.
So what happens is I go ahead and take with the pawn, and it scares well, it doesn't scare the queen away. So he takes with the knight, which gives me a chance to slide over
Yep.
and check if I want to, but I don't because I see an opportunity because now that knight's hanging like you had mentioned, Luke.
Mm-hmm.
So I double up the rook and the queen to give me the power to do that. If he moves the knight, well, I see a spot where he could have moved it to and take back, but no, I had a chance to maybe even take the queen if he moves the knight. I would call that, but maybe a relative pin. Is that the right term for that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we keep playing. He sees that. I go ahead and say, hey, if I have a chance to like get all this power out of the center, I'm going to. So that's what I do. Go ahead and take the queen and take the take the knight.
Man, this is just a wild game from here on out.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Tom was okay doing that because he saw he had an opportunity to fork my rooks on the next move, which great move. But luckily, I had that open check still sitting there.
Yep,
Buy
you had
me, buy me
Not a
some
real
time
fork.
to get them both to safety.
yeah, the fork was an illusion.
Mm-hmm. So we continue to move around. I'm having to move my rook because of the action of the knight. I couldn't tell you why I moved my rook back. I guess I felt like that was safer for some reason. Well, actually, I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So I've gained a little bit of traction here. If you look at the evaluation bar, black is still winning, but not by near as much. My pawn is a sitting duck over there.
So that was actually another critical moment for me. I wish I would have, in retrospect, captured your rook.
Wish you would have captured the what? I'm sorry.
Your rook on C1.
Oh yeah.
Instead of moving
forced me to move my
H
king
file.
over. Yeah.
I wish I would have done that. I mean, you could have captured with the bishop. But honestly, just the way that it is, like, I think the thing that I was concerned about was you had an extra minor piece over what I had. But I really like my pawns. Like, I've got such a solid grouping of pawns that I should have been able to march those down against your bishop and been able to promote or at least take out a piece.
Mm-hmm.
So pawn army versus an extra minor piece. You're still ahead, but the computer starts to like my position a little bit better at this point, especially when I leave that pawn hanging. And you're going to double up and take it for sure. It looks like. I think I was desperate, so I just put the king in check because I could, hoping, maybe just at least putting my bishop more in the middle of the board, it would have more active spaces, plus it protects that pawn. You move out of the way. I'm just trying to center myself, attack a couple pieces at once. So forking the pawn and the knight with my bishop. That's probably my best move on the board at that point. Now you start to march the pawns. I'm like, oh, shoot. But at least I can attack and protect my bishop with the pawn.
These moves you did here, Chris, were just amazing. I just cannot. Tom and I were discussing this together, actually. It was very impressive how you really recognized the position well, and you made your pieces work super well together.
Well, I think I got a little bit lucky, to be honest. I appreciate your compliment. And then I appreciated that you moved that pawn forward because it just kind of helped. I don't know. I felt like it opened it up a little bit more for me because now the knight is not as protected if I could get a chance to attack it. But then, so doubling up my rooks, I think, made you a little nervous. So you brought your rooks back to help protect the back row there. I'm trying to get my white bishop into the action. And so I take a couple moves to do it, but I do get it down there. And you don't let me keep it comfortable. Now, I need your help in explaining why I allowed myself to do that.
It was an excellent move. It was so good. It shocked me. Like, I'm not ready for it. I was not ready for it at all. I mean, I don't know what you were doing, but I can tell you, like, the really good thing about it is when you go there, I have to recapture, right?
Yep.
I have
yep.
because you're going to take this pawn.
So I see it now, right? So yes, Tom, you're right. So you've got to recapture, for the sake of not wanting to lose the points on the pieces. But what I saw was then I could bring my other rook down and left your pawn on A6 sitting there unprotected, so I could swing over and grab it and put a lot of squeezing pressure on the king with the two rooks.
Yes.
That's what I was after. Absolutely. So you do take back. I execute my plan. Just took me a second to remember it. You start coming back to help out with the knight. I move over. I don't know why I didn't take the pawn. I was starting to think more. I was taking some time to really. So there's this book I'm reading, and it's called Becoming the Best Kid at Your School in
Nice.
Chess. It really is written for an elementary school audience. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm about halfway.
But we're
through
all
it.
pretty much elementary level.
Yeah, so I'm reading this book. It's really meant for elementary and junior high children. But I figured if I really could master this simple book, according to the author, you'd be the best kid in your whole school. So, you know, I would feel pretty good about beating any eighth grader out there, right? There's
Yeah.
some really good eighth graders out there. And one of the main premises is that you don't have to think 4 and 5 moves ahead. Typically, I mean, maybe counting how many times a piece is covered. So if you have a bunch of takes and takes backs, you come out on top, that kind of stuff. But typically, the book says you only need to know what's going to happen in the next 1.5 moves. So what's my move? What's my opponent's best move in return? And then what do I do?
Yeah.
If you just really do that well, supposedly that's enough to make you one of the best players out there as far as kids go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what I was starting to do at this point. I was really starting to think through, okay, what if I take this piece? What is he going to do in return? And then what will I do? And that's just the way I tried to finish out the rest of the game. You know, luckily Tom let me back in it, so I even had a chance to do this. And what ended up occurring is that he's, you know, trying to fend off these rooks that have the king pretty much cornered in the corner. And then he makes me nervous because he's still got all those darn pawns and starts running for the border. And I realize, okay, if he converts one of those pawns, I will lose any advantage I have. So actually now the computer says we're about even based on what's going on. I clean up that pawn. He's still taking that pawn.
So while the computer says we are about even, this was a terrifying position for me to play.
Yeah, this is pretty much winning for white, actually.
Okay. I knew I needed to get that other bishop in play because I felt like that bishop was more powerful at this stage of the game than the knight because it can cover a lot more ground in one move. So you protect it. And then
I was prone to make an error. Every single move that I was making, I had like one shot to do something.
Yeah, you had one good move, basically.
I had one good move, and this is where I finally made the mistake. And I don't really know what I was thinking. I was thinking like, you know, if I break up that pin for the pawn, I'm going to be able to get to move my king. I don't know. I wasn't even thinking of the fact that my rook is going to get pinned again, and I'm going to be in huge trouble.
Yeah, and at first I didn't realize that this was a great opportunity for me because I thought, oh, he's just going to take back with the rook, you know, sitting back there on the on rank number 8. But then I realized if he does that, then I can drop one of my rooks.
Yep.
And let's see, would that have made it? That would have been checkmate, wouldn't it? Because you could only come down with the rooks and block, but I would just take again. So I realized, oh, that's awesome. I can take that knight because with the threat of the one move checkmate, he can't take back. So that's what I do. And then at that point, I realized, okay, this is awesome. I've got 2 rooks connected, and I've got that bishop that's going to help me out in some way or another. I just keep putting you in check until I figure out, okay, how can I get the bishop to where it gives me the advantage that I was hoping it would. And then one move away from converting the pawn to a queen, I'm able, luckily, to deliver that checkmate.
That was awesome. Yeah.
It was really awesome.
Very, very well done. And I have to say real quickly, if I may, when we're backing up to, I'm trying to see where I was, it was right. Okay. So right here. Okay. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So the way that you coordinate these pieces, so you get the bishop is arguably the most powerful piece in the board now, the dark square bishop. And now you fork it, you go back. And just the fact that you're recognizing, okay, you're getting him on the 7th rank, and now you moved your bishop away so you can move your rook there. Everything you opened up was just absolutely perfect coordination. Like I cannot say that enough.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Luke. The thing I like the most is that I was able to bring my bishop down to G3 to hook into that pawn. That's one of my favorite little things to do because you the pawn and a bishop in that spot, and like you can't touch them because they're both locked in, almost kind of like having knights locked into each other, like you can get. And I was able to do that while threatening the rook at the exact same time. So I felt like I was getting tempo at this point. Like I was able to attack and kind of get my pieces into a better position at the same time.
Mm-hmm. So what would you guys say is a couple of your key takeaways from this game? Obviously, you know, some of the earlier moments, Chris, you mentioned, you know, when you gave up the pawn and stuff like that, those definitely, I know, were some of them, but what would you say is some of your ultimate takeaways?
Well, for me, it's never give up, you know, because even though I really didn't do a good job in the beginning and Tom crushed the center and I was just fighting to stay alive and get castled, I was able to barely stay alive. And, you know, luckily Tom gave me some opportunities to come back, because you never know when a human being is going to make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So you just keep playing.
I would say my big takeaways are don't overextend yourself, right? Yep. That's how I got into big trouble. One was don't overextend yourself. Another was don't be afraid to simplify the position when you've got the potential for a devastating pawn storm.
Yeah.
That's not something that I do a lot. I mean, if I'm just looking at the pawns in the game, like I mean, I had 3 passed pawns. Those 3 passed pawns were like super, super powerful. And I mean, I recognized that in the end, right, when I was trying to push them, the problem was I hadn't simplified the position yet. So you had so much counterplay that you were able to do with your rooks. And if they weren't on the board, if I had gotten a rook or 2 off the board and it was just, you know, my knight and my pawns against your 2 bishops, I think that would have been a little bit more manageable for me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I agree. I think that's one of the hardest lessons for, you know, that grandmasters are really good at is simplifying the position if you have an advantage. How to simplify it is very, very situational. So I think in this case, yeah, that was your pawn storm could have been a lot more devastating for sure.
Well, good game, Tom. Thank you for playing me a match. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well played. Crazy awesome opening from Tom and an end game for the books for Chris.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks guys for joining us for another episode 123 Chess, and we hope you have enjoyed this and benefit from it. And until next time, continue to improve your game.
Great.
Thank you. Take care.